So I was on the way here and was listening to the Wall Street Journal podcast with Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel, and they were discussing the hearing that happened last week on D.C. statehood. And you and I both lived in D.C. and spent a lot of time there. I spend most summers there, and it was really an interesting take in that they were discussing all the arcane historical constitutional issues with pursuing D.C. statehood. And I thought they had missed a really important part of how D.C. operates, and that is the budget of Washington, D.C. needs to be approved by the federal government. It needs to be actually voted on by Congress. And the reason is that it's an entity that doesn't really have any industry.
Right.
It doesn't really have a tax base other than companies and people that are there to serve the interests of the federal government,
Or get something
from the federal government. And so even if it were to be somehow magically become a state so that Democrats can get 2 extra senators to do their bidding, it doesn't solve the issue that D.C. as an entity, as a city, is a dysfunctional place.
It would be the smallest state by a far.
Oh,
geographically,
completely.
Right? It would be the second smallest population-wise. I think it probably has a population that would be
around 700,000 is what I heard on.
Which is about the population of Wyoming, right, Alex?
700,000?
Yeah.
No, they're like under 100,000.
Wyoming?
Yeah.
No, we have more than 100,000.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
it'd be. I mean, I think of the geographic part of DC. That's a tiny, tiny little state, and then I'm right.
Yeah, about 70.
It's amazing.
yeah.
I was probably thinking of the city.
You might have been thinking of Cheyenne. Alex spent some time in Wyoming.
or Jackson. I love
we've had
Jackson.
a-
We can talk about that some other time.
Yeah.
I love Jackson. Shout out to Jackson.
Shout out to Jackson. Not Jackson, Mississippi.
No, Jackson, Wyoming. Jackson Hole.
Yeah. I don't. I mean, I get the arguments of people who live there on why they, the whole. I mean, license plates say no taxation without representation. It's the whole,
Yeah, but that's. I mean, apparently with the 23rd Amendment, that's not entirely true. They've been able to. They can vote on their city government, and they have a vote for president.
Yep.
But
That's right.
But at the same time, you and I, our representatives, have to approve their budget.
Right.
Yes or no?
Which is always.
And it's in D.C. for the better part of its history over the last 40 years, take away the last probably 15, has been a mess.
Yeah, it's generally a mess. I mean,
Yeah.
the budget's been a mess.
Yeah.
And D.C. itself has been challenging. It is challenging. Again, it was, under Obama's presidency, as you've mentioned this before, under Obama's presidency and Trump's presidency, you saw remarkable gentrification.
Yes.
The city has changed. And
reinvestment in the city, which was all good.
Yeah.
Which was all good. And reinvestment in the federal buildings. I mean, you used to go into the old executive office building and it was old and gray and dismal and not entirely up to speed. And they've done a tremendous job. But that happened under Obama.
yeah, the building they need to get rid of is the FBI building, the Hoover building. It's just awful. It's terrible. There's
No argument here.
My wife used to have her condo was just a block away from there, and so I used to walk by it all the time. But anyway, and I mean, I had a condo that was just literally just north of on. I was at 9th and H, or 9th and G. 9th and
Okay,
G.
you're near Chinatown. and all
Yeah,
that.
I could, look out my window and see.
Which when we were doing internships and getting our political, you didn't go to Chinatown. You didn't walk around that area until they put the Verizon Center in there, which is now something else, and that area changed. And that the only areas that were even worth going to back in like the late 80s, early 90s was Northwest. That's where you kind of tried to stay. And now it's completely changed.
Let me pose a question. Do you think that if the Democrats had a 55 to 45 majority in the Senate, that they'd be talking about
No.
DC statehood?
No.
It's all because of the closeness of the.
Yeah, it's all about trying to ram through an agenda that they say they believe in.
And why is DC more important to them than Puerto Rico for statehood?
I think it's because they're there. They hear it all the time. You know, they live. Most of them probably live there, and so they think it's an easy pick. But I think this is where I agreed with Kim and Bill. It's a much more difficult pick. And actually, I had a conversation about Puerto Rico yesterday with a friend of mine, with my co-chair of YPO Inside Washington, Steve Kupka, who actually is doing tremendous amount of work in Puerto Rico. And the argument he made is, don't think that Puerto Rico is just Democratic. It's just a Democrat vote. It's not. The representative right now is Republican. The governor has been a Republican. So it's it's a completely different place than what you might think. And so the argument there that he made back to me, which I had not thought about, was it's a choice between statehood and independence.
Mm-hmm.
And do you really want an independent Puerto Rico in this wash of, the Caribbean with all these different actors there that are unsavory? Cuba,
Right.
and Venezuela's influence there, and Russia's influence there. Do you really want that? And I was like, I never really thought about that. And he said, so don't just. The reason that there's not a big push for Puerto Rico is precisely the fact that it's not guaranteed to be just a Democratic stronghold.
To benefit Democrats only. Yeah. What's the population of Puerto Rico?
I think it's like 5 million.
So it would be the 2 senators plus 4 or 5 congressmen.
Yeah, it's
Congress people. So it's a different.
Alex is checking. What's the population?
3.194 million.
Okay, I was off by 2, but still significant.
Yeah, way more than DC.
Yeah,
Because DC already has a delegate. Puerto Rico has delegate.
as a delegate.
Yeah. But if we're going to talk about statehood for Puerto Rico, why not the Marinara Islands or
Guam.
Guam?
Yeah.
Or
Well, and I heard this other argument too. Did you know that it's in the Texas state constitution that the entity of Texas can divide up into like 5 or 6 independent states?
Is that right?
Yeah, that they could vote on statehood within the state and become 5 or 6 independent. I don't know the number. I'd have to look it up, but it's in their constitution. So what's to keep Texas from saying, okay?
This just got interesting.
I mean, you can just keep going.
Well,
right?
who's going to do it after that then? If Texas does that, then California's definitely going to do it.
Well, California probably should divide up into
3 or 4?
West California and Central California.
Yeah. I mean, you could have.
I mean, you want to talk about disenfranchised electorate? Just rifle through the San Joaquin Valley of California.
Yeah.
Everyone there is frustrated to no end.
Hi. This becomes a very interesting
It
thought
does.
exercise.
Well, there's always a slippery slope with any type of argument. There's always unintended consequences, and the whole statehood issue is not as clean cut as everyone wants.
Well,
it's politics at its purest,
and
obviously.
I would bet that if you had a vote in Hawaii that said, "Would you like to remove yourself as a state?" they might vote yes.
No, there's probably some states that would, in terms of independence.
Yeah.
So it's always a bigger question than just one thing.
Yeah.
And with DC statehood, it is a constitutional question. There are huge issues with that, but it also is a budgetary question, which they won't be able to overcome even if they were to get independent.
Yeah. And it's just so beyond it. I think the amount of the growth of the federal government, which has gone so beyond what was anticipated and expected by the founders, they didn't expect the district to be anything more than just where the national capital was going to be held, and You know, it was
Well-
basically just a
Apparently, parts of the district also incorporated what's now Arlington County and Alexandria. That was actually given back to Virginia.
plot. Right.
So the easiest, if this really is about voting rights and about disenfranchised voters, then just give the district back to Maryland.
Right.
Just give the city back to Maryland.
Yeah, because
And then you solve it.
It used to be,
But it's not. It's really
square,
about
but then they
it's
gave
really
that stuff back to Virginia, and they haven't given it back to Maryland. So
yeah, it's just really about 2 extra senators to push
Yeah.
through legislation.
yep.
Okay.
All right, rant for the day.
Rant for the day. Thanks for tuning in.